Now to Congress getting back in session after the August recess, and Congressman Mark Pocan joins us now from the 2nd Congressional District, although technically it's a bifurcated job. He's also kind of the de facto rep for the 3rd Congressional District. We'll get into that a little bit later. Congressman, how are you?
I'm doing as well as you can when you're in Washington.
Exactly it. Would you call it a productive August recess for you?
Yes. Whenever you're back home, you're getting regrounded, right? You're finding out what people actually are talking about, not what the bubble and the lobbyists and everyone else in Washington talks about. So, it should be for all members very valuable to do that. But, got a chance to talk to lots of people in district, got a chance to do a town hall in the 3rd Congressional District, got a chance to do a whole lot of things that I can't normally do when we're here 3 out of the 4 weeks and sometimes 4 out of the 4.
I had said going into this that this might be the busiest August recess in recent memory. I mean, there's some Augusts they're quiet and members can get a little bit more downtime, but that there'd probably be less downtime this time around because so many people want to bend your ear on what's happening in the nation's capital. Not the least of which is everything that's in the Trump mega bill, all of the cuts that are coming, and the misinformation that's been coming out about that. Did I turn out to be pretty good in my guess? That's what people wanted to talk to you about?
Yeah, I mean, people still are learning about the big ugly law now, not the big ugly bill, because it's law. And how so many people are going to lose their health care. I think it's something like 15 to 17 million people, not just the Medicaid folks that won't happen until after next year's election, very conveniently timed, but people on the Affordable Care Act, the 20 million people who are going to have subsidies increase next year. And some people are starting to get notified of what those increases are. And it's going to be pretty shocking to people. So, the healthcare aspects alone are one of the biggest, but, taking away food assistance from hungry, poor kids, taking away education funding, K-12. One thing that hasn't got a lot of attention is the Social Security Fund loses a year of life because of the tax cuts to the wealthy. We lost that much revenue that would have been there for that. So you've got a year less of life of Social Security. There's so many things that people wanted to talk about, and we're making sure, as people know about the bill, they dislike it by at least 20 or more points percentage-wise. We just have to make sure more people know about that bill, and that's what we were doing.
Well, and you have to do that in the face of what I said. I called it misinformation, and you had it from the Vice President of the United States making an appearance in La Crosse last week.
Yeah.
And again, making the case. And I looked back at the transcript of the speech because I was noticing it in real time. I'm like, is he just hitting the same note over and over? And sure enough, 6 paragraphs in a row, it was, well, your benefits aren't being cut. Your benefits are being threatened by undocumented immigrants. Of course, he used different terminology for them, but it's the immigrants. It's the immigrants. It's the immigrants. It's the immigrants who are endangering your benefits. It could not have sounded in my mind more like your classic smokescreen of, it's those guys. It's not us who are cutting your benefits.
Well, I think with Medicaid is probably the best example. By law, you can't get Medicaid if you're not a citizen. So there's no federal money that goes to that, right? That's the federal law. So some states have decided to put money in to make sure they're covering non-citizens, but it's a complete horse. What are you? I'm trying to think what I could say on your show.
I said BS. Misinformation, but you can say BS.
Yes, okay. BS. That they would actually say that. So they go back to their fear. They go back to their safe zone, racism. But the reality is, tens of millions of people are going to have their health insurance at risk, or their rates go up. Quite honestly, all of our rates are going to go up because, as we know, with less money out there, that's less money for rural hospitals. People are still going to get sick, and then that is going to go on to all of us. So all they've done is done a cost shift to provide a tax break for Elon Musk and Donald Trump and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and the like. We all wind up paying for it in other ways. And healthcare is probably the most substantial, where people are going to see this hit happen and this cost increase. But, people are still paying too much for things. Donald Trump promised last November that's what he was going to do when he became president. Instead, all he's done is take pages of Project 2025 and sign the bottom of the page. And it's not what we were promised.
We're going to talk to Sean O'Malley in our next hour about your money and the markets. And the subject that we're going to hit is the prospect of stagflation, that we might be there already with inflation, but also a softening job market. And usually you don't see the two together. And when you do, it's especially bad. You've got a president who only wants to look at one side of the equation and is trying to bash the Federal Reserve into cutting interest rates, even though that may not necessarily be the right solution. But my question to you is about the importance of an independent Federal Reserve, and how do we fix an economy if you've got a president trying to use undue influence on the Federal Reserve when it comes to interest rates?
Well, and the real thing that we should, really be talking about for the president anyway is his tariff policy or lack thereof, right? It's this chaotic policy. He's affecting everything that we buy. Just about is going to have increases. We just saw a bunch of countries not going to send things to people in the United States anymore because of a change that happened through tariff law. That's what's costing us. We are paying for tariffs in the end. So even though the federal government gets some of that revenue, it's our money because we're the end user, the people who buy things. That cost is getting passed on to us. So, what he's doing at the Federal Reserve, I think, is obviously very problematic. It's supposed to be independent. That's why it was created the way it was. But I'm more concerned with when you talk about inflation or the lack of jobs, is what's happening through a very uncoordinated tariff policy. In fact, even the most Republican business people I talk to from Wisconsin, it's not even just the tariffs, it's the lack of a policy. It's what you don't know could happen in a couple weeks. So they're not making the investments that Donald Trump said they would to make things here, because that tariff policy is on and again and off again. And who's going to put the investments in when you have a chaotic policy? So that's the one I'm really worried about hurting the economy, because it's coming out of our pockets and it's also affecting the job market and everything else.
And you're getting this double whammy for Wisconsin farmers, where China is now boycotting soybeans. A lot of them come from Wisconsin. And, an American company like John Deere is taking it in the shorts because of the tariff policy. So there's a lot to watch in this. And yet you've got to spend time not so much focused on the broader economy, but on the prospect of, I can't believe I'm saying this again, another government shutdown, showdown with a budget that has to pass. Let's start with the background. What is it that Congress and the president, but what is it that Congress needs to do by when to keep things going, and what's the path forward?
So our fiscal year ends September 30th. If you follow the cartoon, that how a bill becomes a law, we have 12 appropriation bills, right, that are supposed to be passed. To be fair, they rarely pass on time anyway. But at least some of them are done, and there might be what's called a CR, a continuing resolution, that just flat funds and continues current funding. But this Republican majority can hardly do anything. I mean, the amount of work that it took to pass the big ugly law, if it wasn't for all of their donors getting tax breaks, I don't know if they could have unified them around anything. But right now, we haven't done anything substantive on the 12 appropriation bills. So it should be an automatic, they pass a CR, but they can't do it with their own majorities. So they somehow have to get Democratic votes, and they're trying to blame Democrats. This is my favorite. I tweeted about it this morning. I mean, they want to say Democrats are to blame. We're not in charge of the House, the Senate, or the White House. They've got to figure this out. And they're saying we're waiting for a proposal from the Democrats. No, we're not in charge. They got to figure this out. They have not come for our votes. They should be coming and asking and giving something. But the problem is, because the president's doing rescissions and Congress is giving up our Article 1 constitutional responsibility of power of the purse, and the president's stealing money through rescissions that Congress has approved, legally approved, we can't trust them on very much. So this is going to be a shutdown if the Republicans can act. I hope Democrats hold strong and honor ourselves. If they're going to steal money that we've approved, you can't trust them. And that's unfortunately where we're at with them. But, think about just the Wisconsin delegation alone, and then extrapolate that across Congress and realize why you can't get things done.
We're talking to Congressman Mark Pocan as the House of Representatives and the Senate come back from their August recess. And the recess started on very abruptly with Speaker Mike Johnson sending members home because he did not like the fact that there's a growing number of Republicans who also are unhappy that Donald Trump has flip-flopped on the Jeffrey Epstein case of the sexual predator, now calls it a hoax when it's clearly anything but. And if Speaker Johnson thought that sending Congress home, people would just stop thinking about it, as we saw on Capitol Hill yesterday with so many of the Epstein victims coming forward, that's not happening.
Yeah. Well, and I think people deserve to know what's happening. I didn't even realize that there's 1,000 victims when it comes to the Epstein cases. And the fact that they won't release the files, and Donald Trump has had about 10 different answers for why. I mean, it doesn't pass the smell test, right? Why they don't want to release the files. And what they released were almost everything has already been released, and it's still redacted. And excuse me, that was just a way to try to cover for the fact that they can't vote to pass something to say release the files. We have a discharge petition right now. You need 218 people to sign it. We got 4 Republicans, I believe, have signed on so far. Every Democrat will sign on to it. I have already. And at least we should let the public see what's there. Is this the most substantive issue we're dealing with? No. I think people's healthcare and funding of government and what we're actually here to do is still got to be a part of the mix that we're talking about. But certainly it doesn't pass a smell test that the president originally said that they would all be released, and then suddenly they're not. Now he's saying Joe Biden might have added names to it. He's got, depending on the day, a different answer. It's a hoax. And yet I think, enough people realize that that's just not a very credible answer. And obviously, it's obvious his name is in there. It's just a question of how many times and how many times they're going to have to redact that.
And then finally, there's this prospect of the president sending troops to Milwaukee as well as Chicago, all of these other cities. Again, the Congress has oversight powers that it could use. What's your concern about whether we will see Donald Trump use the streets of Wisconsin to continue this show of force for whatever purposes it's all about? It's certainly not about crime.
I think it's more difficult than in DC. I mean, DC obviously is a product, so to speak, of the federal government, right? So therefore, he has a lot more control because we have budgetary control for DC. However, when it comes to Chicago, when it comes to Milwaukee, I don't think he can do what he's putting the bravado out there he wants to do. But what he wants to do is keep you focused on crime, that there's crime going on everywhere, because that's a great fear factor for authoritarians across the globe to make them give up their rights and their freedoms in order to have that leader make decisions for them. So that's what this is all about. Donald Trump trying to continue to gain power, take away our freedoms as individuals. If we're scared enough, you'll let him get away with more. And that's what his intention is.
Power and control. Congressman Mark Pocan, we appreciate your time as always. Hope you had a good August recess, and we'll check in again real soon.
Yeah, thanks, Pat, as always.